Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the first book of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim Aleph, and we are still discussing David's preparations for the building of the Holy Temple. We discussed how he divided up the Kohanim, the priests, into 24 groups, how he divided of the Levites, the ones who were appointed to be the singers and the leaders of prayer and song, divided them into 24 groups. Now we are going to read of another group of Levites, because we had mentioned that they were also in charge of being the guardians at the gates, the gatekeepers that open and close the gates and make sure to control the entry and so on. And the Levites were also in charge of taking care of the temple treasures, the temple property, etc. So these are the property guards and the guardians of the grounds. So that's what we're going to be reading about in chapter 26. Again, there's going to be a lot of names. This would have been meaningful. Remember, this would have been very meaningful to those who, at the beginning of the Second Temple period, were reminded of their own family origins so that no one would be left out, that everyone would get a sense for where they're, of what their role is to play and how important they are and how important their family was. So this is all very complete. Remember, we mentioned how Divrei Hayamim, we've been emphasizing, was written during the beginning of the building of the Second Temple. So, again, let's get going with chapter 26. Lemachlekot l'sho'arim, in order to divide up, or this is the way that they will be divided up, l'sho'arim, those who are the gatekeepers. Lakorchim, to those from the family of Korach, Mishelem Yahu ben Koreh min bnei Asaph. It was Mishelem Yahu, who was the son of Koreh, who was one of the children, descendants of Asaph. So some of the family of Asaph we read about in chapter 25 were from the singers. Some of the family of Asaph went to the Sho'arim, the gatekeepers. I'm sorry. Vilim Shelem Yahu, and to Mishelem Yahu, Panim, he had many sons. Zicharyahu HaBochar, Zicharyahu was the eldest. Yidi'ael Hasheni, he was the second. Zivadyahu Hashlishi, that was the third. Yatniel HaRavi'i, Yatniel was the number four. Elam HaChamishi, Elam was the fifth. Yehochanan Hashishi, Yehochanan was the sixth. Eliyahu Hashvi'i, Eliyahu was number seven. Oved, and to Oved Edom, that was another one of them, a hyphenated name. Banim, he had sons. Who were they? Shemaiah HaBachar. Shemaiah was the eldest. Yehozavat Hasheni was the second. Yoach Hashlishi. V'Sachar Harvi'i, Netanel HaChamishi. Netanel was the fifth. Amiel Hashishi was the sixth. Yisachar Hashvi'i. Pu'ultai Hashmini. Pu'ultai was the eighth. Kivercho Elohim, because God had blessed him, presumably with all of these sons. Shmaya, we mentioned one of the sons was named Shmaya, Beno, who was his son. Noah Banim, he had sons. Hamim Shalim Leveit Avihem. They were, even though these were grandsons of his, but in that family, they were Mimshalim. They were literally, they had some sort of leadership authority. Because they were very strong and powerful. We'll see this phrase pop up several times in this chapter. The person, sometimes chayil refers to a person's wealth. Here it probably, and sometimes it refers to their abilities in war. Here it kind of sort of means the latter, but it's really it seems to be referring to their strong, imposing people, which are important for the task of being a guard. Of being a sho'er. So they had leadership positions because they were large, imposing people. Bnei Shemaiah, the sons of Shemaiah, who were they? Atni, Urifael, V'Oved, Elzavad, Echav bnei Chayil. Their brothers were also people that were strong and able-bodied. Elihu, Usmachyahu, those were the brothers of Shemaiah. Kol Ele b'mnei Oved Edom, all of these were descendants of Oved Edom. Hemo uvneihem v'achehem, they and their sons and their brothers. Ish Chayil b'koach, each one was a man of substance, bakoach, and they had strength and power, la'avoda, in order to do the work that that they were assigned, using the same word avoda here as the word we used for avoda for the prayer and song, because avoda here means worship, and worship can be done in many different ways. Each person has his role, each person has his own skills and abilities, and for the people we're discussing now, that was to be guards. Shishim Ushnayim Oved Edom. There was a total of 62 men in the family of Oved Edom. Vilim Shelem Yahu Banim. Shelem Yahu also had sons, Viachim and brothers. Bnei Chayil, also strong, able-bodied men. Shmona Asar, there were 18 of those. Ulechosa, and now we're going to, those were from the Korach family, but now we're going to, from the Bnei Merari, from the Merari family, one of the sons of Levi was Merari. Remember Gershom, Kahat, and Merari. And one of those sons was Chosa. He also had sons. Shimri Harosh, the head one was the Shimri Kilo Haya Bukhar. He was not the firstborn, but he was the oldest. It could be he had an older brother who passed away, or it could be the firstborn was a girl. But either way, he was the head, but he was not actually the firstborn. By Isimehu Avihu Larosh, and his father made him the one in charge. Chilkiyo Hasheni, Chilkiyo was the second, Tvalyo Ashlishi, Zicharyo Harvi'i, Kol Banim V'Achim L'chosa Shnei Masar. They had a total of 13 sons and brothers. Le'ela Machlokos HaSho'arim L'Rashei HaGvarim. These are the groups of the gatekeepers, those divided by the heads of the men who were in charge of the groups of guards, Leumat Achayim, together with their brothers, L'Sharet B'Beit Adonai, in order to do service in the house of God. And in order to divide up who does what, this shifts were different. The others, the singing and the temple service, were divided in 24 groups. And throughout the year, there were different groups of singers, different groups of priests. These were the goralot, the lots that are going to be drawn, are going to appoint them over specific gates to the Temple Mount. Now, so this would seem to indicate that David had like drawn up building plans, which shouldn't be surprising, being that he hired the workers to cut the stones and the smiths for the metals and the materials and the carpenters for the wood. It makes sense that he had already drawn it up the plans, and they already knew what the gates were going to be. So so they cast lots in order to determine who gets which gate. Vayipol Hagarol Mizrachal Shelem the eastern gate went to Shelem Zechariah Beno, and his son Zechariah. Yoetz, his son Zechariah was a Yoetz. He was a person of wise counsel. Pesachel, he gave appropriate, successful, and proper advice. Hipilu Goralot, and they so they cast lots, and his son Zechariah, Vayetze Goralot Sophoni, he got the north gate. So now Shelemia gets the east gate, Shalem Yohu, and Zechariah gets the north gate. Oved Edom, Negba Oved Edom got the southern gate, Ulivanav, Beit HaAsupim, and his sons got the gate called Beit HaAsupim, which is the literally it's the place where they would store things, or sometimes it's sometimes translated as the vestibule, but so that was the Beit HaAsupim, which was on the southern wall, in the southern area of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple complex. L'Shupim, but Shupim u'Lechosa and Chosa Marav, they had the west side, Imshar Shaleches, which corresponded to the gate of Shalechet, B'Mesila Ha'ola, which was on the path that went up. So there was a path that went up to the Temple Mount, and on the west side, and this path had a gate entering that Temple Mount. Mishmar Le'umat Mishmar. Each watch had a corresponding watch. I wonder, I mean, obviously, when one thinks about the Temple Mount today, there's a path that goes up I think it's called the Mugrabi Gate, maybe, that goes up onto the Temple Mount. Obviously, these are much, much later structures, and we're talking about the building of the first temple. So it's very hard, it's hard not to try to envision the Temple Mount today and try to imagine where these gates were. But clearly these were the temple was this was long before Herod's Temple Mount. This was the first temple period. It wasn't even built yet, but there was a path coming up the west side, wherever that path was, leading to a gate. Mizrach on the east, Halavim of the Levites, there was Shishal Atzvona. There was six Levites guarding the east gate, and the north gate, Layom Arba'a. There was four every day. Lenegba on the south side, Layom Arba'a. There was four every day. Ulasupim Shnayim Shnayim, and at the vestibule at the Asupim, there was two at a time. Lefarbor at the Parbor, which is generally translated as the colonnade, an area where there were like kind of like a portico. So there was on the west, Arba la Masila. There was, I'm sorry, Arba, there were four people guarding that area, La Masila, on the path, Shnayim la Parbar. There was two people on each colonnade. Fine. This is how the gatekeepers were divided up. Some of them were descendants of Korach, some were descendants of Merari. And of the Leviim, Achia, there was Achia who was in charge al Otzrot Beit Elim. He was in charge of guarding and taking responsibility for the treasures of the house of God, ul Otzros HaKodashim, and the treasures of the items that had been consecrated. So we talked about their job as guards of the gates, keeping the flow of people in and out proper, but they also were in charge of securing the valuables. Bnei La'adon, the sons of La'adon, who were they? Bnei Gershoni, the sons of Gershoni, La'adon. They came from the Gershonite family. Remember, one of the three sons of Levi. So La'adon, one of his descendants was La'adon, and he descended from him was the following families. The top family was the Yechieli family. Bnei Yechieli, he had sons Zesam, Yoel, Achiv, was Zesam and Yoel, Alatzos, Beis Adonai. Probably one of the most interesting things here is the names. I pointed out a little bit here and there. All of these names are really the collection of Hebrew names that, and in most cases, it's still to this day form the basis of Hebrew names. So you have Yechiel, we saw Yochanan before, we see, Gershon, Yoel is the name of Joel the prophet. So all these names are common Hebrew names that are used over and over again. We saw Gedaliyahu, we saw Ishayahu, Isaiah, we saw Matityahu, all these names. We see Zechariyahu, Eliezer, so on and so forth. Anyway, so they were in charge of the Otzros, of watching over the goods. Le'amramili, Yitzharila, Chavronila, Azieli, of those families, Ushvuel ben Gershon ben Moshe, Shvuel, who was a descendant of Moshe, he was Nagid al Ha'otzoros. He was in charge of all of the groups that were in charge of watching over the treasures. And remember, David had set aside a lot of valuable treasures, so this was a responsible job. The Echav and his brothers, Le'eliezer, to his brother Eliezer, he had Rechaviyahu beno. He had a son named Rechaviyahu, Vishayahu beno. And again, the name Rechavia is going to pop up. It's going to be Solomon's son's name. He's going to be one of the kings of Judah later on. Vishayahu beno, his son Isaiah, Vyoram beno, and his son Yoram, another name that pops up among the kings. Vizichri beno, Ushlomit beno. That name Shlomit also came up several times in the past few chapters. Excuse me. Who Shalomot v'echav? He, Shalomot, and his brothers, they were Al Kol Otzros HaKodashim. They were in charge of watching over the consecrated items, Asher Hikdish David HaMelech, those which David had specifically consecrated for the temple. V'Rasheha, exactly how their job differed from the job of Shvuel that before, who was in charge of all the Otzarot. It's hard to say who is in charge of what, but regardless, this was their job. And they were dedicated by David and also the heads of the families. and the heads of the various groups, that the people in charge of thousands, in charge of hundreds, and so on, that had consecrated many things. And where did they get these items from? In hamilchamot, min hashalal hikdishu. These are the things that were consecrated, and because they were obtained by war or in booty, as a result of the many battles, l'chazek lebeit Adonai, and they were being dedicated to strengthen the house of God and build it up. V'chol ha'hikdish Shmuel haro'eh v'Shaul ben Kish v'Avner ben Ner, and everything that Saul, King Saul, and Samuel, the prophet, all these that preceded David, v'Avner ben Ner, right, v'Yoav ben Tzruya, those are the generals of Saul. So David is incorporating the items that Saul had won, as well as he saw himself as the successor to Saul. Kol hamakdish al yad Shlomit v'Yaakov, anything that was consecrated was being watched by Shlomit and his brothers. La Yitzharit, those who are descended from Yitzhar, another one of the Levites, Kenanyahu banav, that was his Kenanyahu, and his sons, La Melacha, Chitzonah, Yisrael, Shoftim, L'Shoftim. They were appointed to the outer work. They weren't guarding doors and they weren't guarding goods. They were in charge. They were shotrim, like officers, enforcing the peace, of shoftim and judges. La Chevroni, to the Chevroni clan, Chashavyo, v'Echav b'nei Chayil, Elef v'Shameos, Chashavyo and his brothers, who were strong, able-bodied men, 1,700 of them. Al Pugudas Yisrael, they were in charge of of um of literally, counting and being in command of the people of Israel. Me'ever le'ardin marava, regarding the matters pertaining to those people, members of Israel, who lived on the east side of the Jordan River. Anything that related between them and the work in the temple of God and the service of the king, they were in charge of arranging that. So any monetary matters and so on that pertain to those that lived on the other side of the Jordan, this group of 1,700 were the judges and the officers in charge of that. Lachavroni, to the Chavroni, Yiriyah Harosh, the head was Yiriyah, a Chavroni, Ultolosav La'avos, to the Chevronites and all of his descendants, divided up by families. Bishnat Arbaim, these were all set aside and set up during the 40th year, L'malchut David Nidrashu. That's when they were chosen and set aside during the 40th year of David's kingdom. And they found, men of substance, men of means, in Yazer, which is in Gilad, which is, remember, part of the tribe of the Menashe that lived on the other side of the Jordan. So we see how they set up. We saw set up gatekeepers, people watching the treasures, people watching the items, people in charge of the financial relationships and donations and so on, and relationships with those that lived farther away. V'Yachav b'nei Chayil and his brothers, who also men of substance, Alpayim u'shvam yoto she'avot. There were 2,700 heads of families. Vayafkidem David HaMelech, and David appointed them al Reuveni v'Hagadi v'chatzi shevet Hamanashi, on the Reuvenites, the Gadites, and the half shevet of Manassites, right? Who lived again on the other side of the Jordan, regarding anything that had to do related to their relationships with the temple and relationships with the king. So here we have David setting up a functioning government with officers to function with communication and taxes and whatever is relevant to relating to the people living in the farther flung regions of his realm and their relationship to the temple. So this concludes chapter 26. I know it's kind of a lot of names and this kind of stuff, but it does give you a sense of David really getting down to the nitty-gritty work of setting up a kingdom, so that when Solomon takes over from him, Solomon will take over a system that has all of the nuts and bolts and people in place ready to really, really make this into something wonderful and successful. Thank you so much for studying chapter 26 with me. Looking forward to studying chapter 27 and, of course, the entire wonderful book of Chronicles together. Have a wonderful day.